We abominate, we are disgusted by such an evil. As St. Catherine of Siena received the revelation from God, she's a doctor of the church, that even the devils abhor homosexuality because they will the damnation of men. They will tempt people to commit the sin. But when the devils see people engaging in those actions, they are so disgusted that the devils leave. Because the devils are angelic beings. They were created with an angelic intellect. And so it is the very nature, even of the fallen angels, to be disgusted by homosexuality. So after they tempted people to commit these sins, when they actually engage in the sins, the devils who tempted these men and women to commit these sins, they leave their presence. They leave in disgust. Entire cities were buried under the ashes of the fire and the brimstone, and in the bottom of the Dead Sea. Sodom and Gomorrah and some nearby towns. That was the wrath of God revealed in sacred scripture. And yet our government is asking us to vote on this point. And there is so much propaganda in favor, as if we will be doing something good to vote for this. We must understand, as this formerly Catholic nation withdraws from the light of the divine truths of revelation, and God allows it to follow after its own devices. We will reap not any new freedom, not any new dawn of liberty if this legislation is passed. We will incur the wrath of God. The wrath of God upon this nation. And I don't accuse particular individuals, but it's all of our fault. For those of us who vote for political parties who deviate from the divine law for any temporal motive as an excuse. There is no excuse. For those parties that represent and promote policies to implement against the law of God, the only result is the judgment of God, the wrath of God. So God has left us to our own devices. So often, people vote for political parties that are opposed to the law of God, opposed to the morality of what we must do to save our souls, opposed to what we must believe to save our souls, that people justify in their minds to vote for this party or that party. And so, in this nation, we've voted into power nations that, we have voted into power politicians who side with nations who are opposed to our own interests. Look, for example, Ireland is participating in the sanctions against Russia. We are supposed to be a neutral country. Why are we taking sides with the British and the Americans against Russia with these sanctions? It harms us. Our Lady warned that Russia will be the instrument of chastisement of the whole world. To Blessed Elena Ayala, Our Lady said that Russia will march upon all Europe, especially in Italy, but will overrun all of Europe. Why would Russia do such a thing? And the answer is because Russia is being provoked. Just like what happened in the Ukraine, you had a democratically elected government, elected by the Ukrainian people, and the CIA and the MI6 send in all of their people, and the National Endowment for Democracy trained all these people to go in and to overthrow the legitimate government of Ukraine, to create a puppet state so that it could surround with the encirclement of Russia, with the aim of doing to Russia the same thing that they have done to Ukraine. And the Western media says that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia. They point to Crimea. They say there was an invasion. Yes, Russian troops came into Crimea, totally within accordance of the treaty between Russia and Ukraine. There was no invasion. This was entirely within the terms of the treaty. And yet, the Western media keeps putting out the propaganda that there was an invasion, and that Mr. Putin is an expansionist like Hitler. And the people in the eastern Ukraine, they understand that the European Union is like the Titanic. It's a sinking ship. They understand perfectly that the economic power of Russia was on the rise, and they didn't want to be part of Europe. They voted into office Mr. Yanukovych. With the power of the ballot, they kicked out the American puppet, Yushchenko. And so what did they do? The Americans and the Brits organized the overthrow of the legitimate government of Ukraine. And they brought in Petro Poroshenko, the fascist, the Jewish billionaire. And you look at the writings of the mentors of the American leaders, and it's all the same. They want to do the same thing to Russia. So can we understand that Russia is being provoked into war? When Russia invades the West, it's not because Russia wants to expand and exert imperial power over the world. Personally, when I look at what has been going on for the last several years, I am amazed by the patience of Mr. Vladimir Putin. A lesser man would have attacked already, would have already invaded the West. The patience of this man is beyond belief. He has seen his nation undergo so many provocations, and yet he holds back. He doesn't attack. He says again and again, it is not the intention of Russia to dominate other nations. But Our Lady of Fatima warned that without the consecration of Russia, Russia will become the instrument of chastisement for the whole world. And why is that? Because God has decreed to punish the whole world. Because the human race is in rebellion against God. On the very first point of what unites us to God, people have fallen away from faith, and we are seeing within the whole world, throughout the whole world, apostasy. The total falling away from belief in God, from those things that God has revealed that we must believe and must do to be saved. So this brings us to what must be done to remedy. We see the illness, we see the danger. What must be done to save us from this evil? Our Lady of Fatima said, referring to herself, only she can save you. President Putin went to the Vatican in November of 2013. He knows the message of Fatima. He knows the prophecies. He's a devout Orthodox Christian. And he knows that Russia is in great danger. But Our Lady promised that God will save Russia. God will save Russia by means of the act of consecration that Our Lady asked for at Fatima. And Our Lady said by means of that consecration, Russia will be converted, Russia will be saved, and peace will be given to the whole world. Mr. Putin, when he went to speak with Jorge Bergoglio, who likes to call himself Father Bergoglio, Bishop of Rome, doesn't like to be called Pope. When Mr. Putin asked Francis about the consecration of Russia, having a great interest for the well-being of Russia, the reply given to Mr. Putin by Francis was a cold response. We will not discuss Fatima. We have the entire reversal. Back in the time of the Soviet regime, the communists were allergic to the idea of the conversion of Russia, the consecration of Russia, the idea that Russia needed any kind of conversion. But Mr. Putin is a devout Orthodox Christian, and he understands that his nation is in need of conversion. Russia is threatened internally by all kinds of paganism and all kinds of nihilism, and that there should be a promise from heaven to save Russia. And through the salvation of Russia, that the world will be given peace. Mr. Putin has taken a great interest in that. And that's why he spoke and asked on this point in his visit to Francis Bergoglio, only to be given a response which amounts to a snub. We will not discuss it. Why would a man who is supposedly a pope give this kind of response? I say supposedly a pope because before I even answer that question, I would like to point out, this is not so well known in the English-speaking world, but on the European continent, and especially in Italy, there is great speculation, debate, and there is great murmuring among the cardinals of the Roman Church today about this man, Jorge Bergoglio. They're beginning to understand that he is not a Catholic at all. He is an infidel. He is a man without faith, with no Catholic faith whatsoever. There was the article written by Professor Stefano Violi, professor of canon law in the Faculty of Theology of Emilia-Romagna and Lugano. And that article was published in the Theological Journal of Lugano. We're not talking about some blogger here. We're talking about a highly respected academic. An article published in the Theological Journal of the Theological Faculty. The article is called The Renunciation of Benedict XVI in History, in Law, and in Conscience. I don't know why it's never been translated into English. The article in Italian is, if you read it, it's very incisive. It's a critical analysis of the words of Pope Benedict in his renunciation. Nowhere, contrary to what you read in the English-speaking press, English language press, where they quote Pope Benedict as saying that he resigned, and you see, my resignation, I resigned. No, he never used that word. He never spoke of resigning, never. Pope Benedict spoke only of renunciation of the active exercise of the ministry, of the Petrine ministry, which means the papal ministry. He renounced the active exercise of the papal ministry. The analysis of Professor Violi goes through the words in the Latin declaration and in the Italian text of his final audience, where he explains his meaning. And Pope Benedict says so clearly that he relinquishes the active exercise of the Petrine ministry, and therefore he will no longer exercise the power of governance. But he says there is to the papal ministry, there is the active exercise of the ministry and also the passive exercise of the Petrine office. And he says that he received on the day of his election, and he does not relinquish that. So he compares himself to a bishop, and it is through the exercise of the supreme power of the Pope, the plenitudo potestatis, the fullness of power, that a Pope can relieve any archbishop in the world of his power of governance and hand that power of governance, that jurisdiction, over to a coadjutor. I remember this happening twice, at least in the Archdiocese of Cebu, especially Cardinal Rosales was Archbishop of Cebu, and the Pope, John Paul II, relieved him of the power of governance and handed the power of governance to Archbishop Vidal with the right of succession. And so Cardinal Rosales remained Archbishop of Cebu, but he had no power to govern. The power to govern was in the hands of Archbishop Vidal. And then finally, with the right of succession, Cardinal Vidal became the Archbishop of Cebu. Cardinal Vidal was made Cardinal Archbishop of Cebu. And eventually, he was replaced. So Pope Benedict, in renouncing the power of governance, and very clearly he renounced only that, he did not renounce the papacy. There is nowhere the word abdication, there is nowhere the word resignation of office. He steadfastly avoided that. He said he should be renouncing the active exercise of the ministry, that he relinquishes the power of governance. That's all he gave up. Or at least all he attempted to give up. And so, as a result, there was a conclave that elected Jorge Bergoglio, who took the name Francis. The problem with that scenario is that the Pope, having the fullness of power, can decree to any diocese or archdiocese in the world that the power of governance is to be taken away from a bishop and given to a coadjutor. But for the Pope himself, the charism and the office of the papacy cannot be divided between two men. And so the problem with the renunciation of Pope Benedict is properly this. As it is so well explained, and this point has never even been disputed or even discussed since 1610. The most celebrated theologian of Italy